Hello, welcome to 2024. Are you ready for a fresh start? Ready or not, I think all of us will experience one in some way this year. New Year's resolutions. Well, there are things that I quit doing several years ago because I found out they just couldn't keep them very long. But somehow, the fresh start, a new beginning, things happen throughout the year. And maybe today will be the day you have your fresh start. Oftentimes it happens unexpectedly. We're going to quickly look at 4 people today and their fresh start. Peter, that well-known, most beloved disciple of all, he certainly needed a fresh start. You see, he had followed Jesus for 3 years, and for 3 years he heard Jesus talk about who he was, talk about God's plan, and he even heard Jesus say that he was going to die. And he was there at the Last Supper when he said, I go and prepare a place for you, and if I go, I'm going to come again. He heard all of that. But somehow, Peter's like us, hearing something and understanding it, sometimes they're miles away. And so when it came time when the soldiers showed up at that Garden of Gethsemane, Peter ran. And then there in the courtyard with other Jews who didn't believe in Jesus, 3 different times Peter says, I don't know him. Peter denied Jesus. He needed a fresh start. So what happened? Easter morning, Resurrection Day, Jesus appeared. And what did he say to Mary? He says, go tell the disciples and Peter. That day, Peter had his fresh start. He was forgiven. Another well-known and beloved apostle was Paul. Now, Paul wasn't always a guy that we would love. Paul grew up as a believing Jew. He believed in God. And he believed that the Messiah was going to come one day. The problem was, for Paul, he certainly did not believe that that Messiah was Jesus. And so what did he do? He went throughout the land and he persecuted and even led people to their death if they said, Jesus is Lord. He did not believe it at all. He did not believe that Jesus could be the Son of God until one day he had his fresh start. He was on his way to Damascus. He had letters with him that gave him the authority to capture, persecute, do whatever was necessary to get rid of believing Christians in Damascus. But along the way, he had an encounter. And Jesus in that voice said, I am Jesus whom you have been persecuting. Paul changed. From that day on, he believed. He believed that Jesus was the Son of God who came as the promised Messiah, the one who came to give him life, the one who had died for his sins and was resurrected. In the Old Testament, there's a couple of ladies. You see, it's not just men that had fresh starts or even needed them. Women as well. Ruth. There's a small book in the Old Testament, only has 4 chapters, and it's named after her. She was a poor, unbelieving widow, and she was a Gentile. Her husband had died. Her husband was a Jew. She was left with just her mother-in-law. And according to the custom of the day, if the husband died, it became the husband's family's responsibility to take care of the wife. So Naomi, the mother-in-law, decides, I'm going to go back to my home. And Ruth, just like a good daughter-in-law, says, well, I'll go with you. Along the way, Naomi realizes, I'm too poor to take care of myself. I don't have anything. How can I take care of a daughter-in-law? So she tells Ruth, going back home, go back to your family. You'll be taken care of there. Ruth makes that famous statement that wherever you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. She followed God. And you know what? She had a new life. She didn't stay a widow forever. The richest guy in town saw her. She had a new life, and she became the bride of Mr. Boaz. Boaz and Ruth became the great-great-great-great-grandparents, 10 generations down of King David, who became even more generations down the grandparents of Jesus, the greatest king of all. And then we can't forget about Esther. Esther's another one who had a book in the Old Testament named after her. Now, Esther was a good Jewish girl. She was living a comfortable life. Yeah, she was a widow. She was an orphan. She was living with her cousin Mordecai, but he took good care of her. She was loved, so why would she need a fresh start? Actually, she probably didn't think she did. Especially the day when the king's men showed up and said, we're taking all the virgins and we're going to take them to the palace. And then the king will decide who wants to become his wife with all of the beautiful virgins in the land throughout all of the 10 providences. The chances of one being chosen were so very, very slim. But God. He gave Esther that fresh start. She became the queen. From an unknown girl, orphan girl, living with her cousin, to the queen of the nation. All of these had a fresh start. But you know what? They're just like us. In order to have a fresh start, we've got to leave something behind. It's just like you're going in, you're at the mall, and you have to decide. There's 2 doors. One goes to this store, and one goes to that store. Whichever door you choose, you can no longer go in the other door at the same time. You can't go in 2 at the same time. You have to choose not to go in one when you take the other. When these people had their fresh start, they had to leave something behind. Peter, he wanted to be forgiven. He needed to be forgiven. But in order for that to happen, he had to get rid of his guilt. Some of you have been carrying guilt for a long time. You've asked people to forgive you. You've asked God to forgive you. And it keeps on standing in your way because you just can't get over it. And you know what you did in the past, just like Peter remembered that he denied Jesus. To get rid of your guilt, you have to do what Peter did. Get forgiveness from others. He did, He knew Jesus forgave him. He prayed and said, God, forgive me. But the other thing he had to do, and that you have to do, to get rid of guilt, you have to forgive yourself. It's over. It's done. Jesus says if we confess our sins, he is faithful, he's just, and he will forgive us and he will cleanse us. That's what he did for Peter. That's what he wants to do for you. How about Paul to get his fresh start? He was a believer now. He knew that Jesus was the Messiah. But in order to get that, he had to let go of all of his beliefs. His beliefs told him that the Messiah was yet to come. His beliefs told him that there's no way that Jesus could be the Son of God. And more than that Jesus, who died on the cross, could be resurrected the third day and could be the one who will come again as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He hadn't believed any of that. But in order to get a fresh start, he had to lay aside everything that he thought was true, but was really wrong, and let his thinking be changed. Some of you've been caught up in a lot of things that just aren't right. They're just not true. Maybe they're not true about the Bible. Maybe you've heard people say things and you just follow them without really knowing. What does God's word say? What does the Bible have to say? Let God speak to your heart about that. What about Ruth? Well, Ruth, she was a poor widow, but she was in the land of Moab. And when Naomi says, don't go back to me, go back to your family, to get her fresh start, Ruth had to leave her security. Now, sometimes what we're hanging on is sort of like what Ruth was hanging on to. It's not much, but it's all we got. It's all we've ever known. Ruth had never seen the country of Israel. She had never seen Bethlehem. She didn't know these people. And when she told Naomi that I'm going to live where you live, she didn't know what type of house it was. Your people, she did not know if Naomi's friends and family would accept her. And she said, and your God. You see, growing up, Ruth was a Moabite, and they certainly did not worship the God, the creator of the heavens and earth, but they worshiped many other gods. And she had to leave all those behind. Everything that she had held on to all of her growing up and into her adult life, she had to leave behind and say, yes, I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to trust that where you're going and that your people and your God will take care of me. And sometimes, that's what we've got to do. We've got to say, I believe that when I follow God, other believers are going to accept me. And God is going to accept me and love me, and they'll take care of me. Finally, Esther. What did Esther have to leave? Well, she was already a good girl in a comfortable life. She had to leave her family and all of her friends. She was cut off from her cousin Mordecai, who had raised her. And of course, she was cut off from all of her other friends there. None of those had access to the palace. And all of a sudden, one day, without warning, she was stripped of family and friends and put in a brand new situation. And there, she had to make a decision. She could sit around and mope and cry and complain about what she had lost, who she didn't have, and how much she was missing it. Or she could look for her fresh start and believe that God had put her there for a purpose. And then as Mordecai later told her, she says, who knows but you're called to the kingdom for such a time as this. And who knows for you that 2024 might be the year for you, the year that God has called you to have a fresh start, to have a new place, a new beginning. But in order for that to happen, you've got to leave some things behind. Family, friends, security, wrong beliefs, guilt, whatever it is, and maybe it's something that wasn't even mentioned today. Just know that if you leave those behind, the things that you're holding on so tightly to, and release everything to God, He will give you more. You see, in the end, Mordecai and Esther got back together. In the end, Ruth, who gave up security, she was more secure than she ever had. Paul, who gave up his false beliefs, found the words to say, I know whom I have believed, and I am persuaded. He found truth. Peter, who gave up guilt, he went on to start other churches, to become a very strong leader. You see, anytime we give up something for God, He replaces us with something so much better as He gives us a fresh start. And that's my prayer for you in 2024.